We're here today with Kathy Cardilli and Natale McConnell to talk about casework for working the case.
I'm the Director of Family Services, and so my areas of responsibility include CPS management, foster care, adult protective services, juvenile justice work, and our preventive services.
And I'm the Director of Child Protective Services. I have oversight over our traditional investigation teams, our impact team, which handles cases of sex abuse, serious physical abuse, and fatalities, our CPS intake and after hours team, as well as our training team.
And I think our responsibilities are fairly similar, we just have different areas of focus.
What are those responsibilities?
Oh my goodness, we do a lot of contracts, program development, quality reviews, protocol and policy development. We're engaged with our staff development units to look at what works for retention, focus around trauma.
We monitor caseloads, we ensure that supervisors and senior caseworkers are giving their caseworkers what they need. We're part of a lot of community collaboratives, I'd say.
We do presentations in the community. I think when there are gaps, we pick up to help our teams, whether it's helping on casework or supervisory tasks.
I was going to ask you, do the details of cases end up with you?
Yes.
Yes.
So in my role, typically, I oversee 2 teams directly, and then I have 3 administrators under me that oversee the other teams and then report to me. But supervisors, caseworkers will come to myself, as well as my administrators all the time to discuss cases they're worried about, cases that possibly need court intervention, possibly in the media. We review cases for quality assurance. In my area, we do both open case audits and closed case audits. And we get a lot of the phone calls from the community where they have questions about cases or concerns about cases.
Absolutely. With our case reviews, we see, the minute details of the cases. I read every termination of parental rights petition that we send down to court, so I'm familiar with those. And I think our supervisors who've come up with us, who've been around for a while with us, know what cases we knew as caseworkers or as supervisors, and so when there's good news to share, they make a point of letting us know those things as well.
So how would you describe what is the most challenging part of your job?
I think it's balancing our roles as well as being supportive to the people that we oversee, especially right now where we see, not just in our area, but across really the country where people are not getting applicants. We have, I'm trying to think of the best way to, you're filling in holes. So we're constantly figuring out who can assist with helping out where there might be a vacancy. So I think that's probably been in my 26 years and my last 3 as a director, I think that's been the most challenging since COVID began.
Yeah, lack of resources is absolutely the biggest challenge. I think a lot of people would think that because it's CPS work, it would be the things that we see. That's really not it. It's really how do you meet the needs in the community.
As well as supporting the staff right now with, at the beginning of COVID, our numbers went down, we're back up to normal, and giving them that support and the resources they need to be most successful with their families.
Yeah. Especially when there's a lot of new people. You want to make sure that they're feeling competent and safe to do the work that they're doing.
What was the driving force in you getting into this kind of work to begin with? I mean, do you remember, were you both right out of college when you? Yeah.
I was about 2 years out of college, and I'm going to be honest, I did not know what Child Protective Services was, and then I became the clerk in foster care pediatrics. So I met a lot of the foster care workers and then started to learn a little bit more about Child Protective. I mean, I'd gone and gotten my degree and did internships, but never, and I had done mine in probation. So I had never done it in services per se. And then I went to the impact team for a year, and that's when I really understood what a child protective worker did and decided I wanted to take the caseworker exam.
And I worked out of college. I worked at St. Joseph's Villa for about 6 years, and then I spent a year working in the jails, and decided to go back and get my master's degree and applied at the county. And I actually recall interviewing with the director at the time and saying, "I'll do anything except CPS." And of course, I started in CPS, and genuinely found that I really enjoyed the work. I liked that I am still never bored. There is always something different, always something new, always something challenging. It's the kind of work that if you like variety, it's excellent.
And would you say that's why you've stayed in it all these years?
Yeah, I very much enjoy the people that I work with and the work that we do.
And we're constantly learning new things. Sometimes I say we can write a book with everything we've seen and heard, but when you see a family, like living here in Rochester, you run into families you worked with. I go into my Wegmans where I shop, and I remember this one woman came up to me. She's like, "Do you remember me? Do you remember me?" I'm like, "Yes, I did," but I will never go up to someone and say anything because confidentiality. And she said to her daughter, "Don't you remember her? She was our child protective caseworker." And it made me feel good because she was not afraid to say it. They were doing very well. So those are the things that are very rewarding when you see something that you made an impact in some way in someone's life.
And we work with every service provider in Monroe County, so we're exposed to every human service agency there is.
Can you describe your career path? I mean, I think you mentioned it briefly, but just describe how that works and talk a little bit about the civil service testing process, because I think that's confusing and maybe a little intimidating to people.
So I started as a clerk, which was a civil service test as well. And then 2 years later, I took the caseworker exam, which that is the entry level casework position. We also have case aides, but in order the series. So when you become a caseworker, after 3 years that you become a caseworker within our department, and there's a wide variety of jobs within our department. It's not just child protective. There's foster care, residential services, preventive, to name a couple. Then you can take the next step, which is a senior caseworker. So every step you move up is a civil service test, all the way up to ours. Our positions were also civil service tests. So we were both senior caseworkers, supervisors, administrators, and now we are both directors.
Right, and the civil service test, I wouldn't say is hard. It doesn't always have a whole lot to do with child protective work. It seems to have a lot to do with English grammar, which makes a lot of sense because so much of our work is written, and logical sequence of thought, I think.
So if you're meeting somebody today, is this some guy you run into, and that person is considering becoming a caseworker, what do you tell them?
Take the test. You'll never be bored. We have the best stories.
No 2 days are ever alike, and even all of our years later, we learn something new. And you're amazed at how resilient the families you meet are. It's sad because you see how much trauma they've gone through, and unfortunately sometimes you see that same family. I was just on a phone call last week, and I had the family when I was a caseworker, and they're still involved in our system, and other kids are involved in their system, and they've had a wide variety of services. So sometimes it's sad when you look at it, but a lot of times you see just how they've gotten to the other side, and they're moving forward. So it's incredibly rewarding.
And I think it can be either of two things. It can be a building block to a future career, because as a caseworker, you are exposed to every human service agency job in Monroe County, and you can make a career here. There are a lot of opportunities for promotion, and if you're someone who really enjoys the diversity in your work and the rewards that come with it, it's a great way to spend your career.
And you don't have to stay in that one particular area here. There is opportunities to transfer to other units, to see other things outside of just child protective investigation and child protective management, which is typically where you begin.
Where you start.
But you have opportunity, if you want to go to different areas as caseworkers. Now, Amy and I, we stayed where we were the whole entire time as caseworkers until we were promoted.
Yeah. we both really enjoy child protective work.
I think most people would find that surprising.
Yeah, no, I love
I was a
it.
caseworker in investigation for 8 years and then became a senior and all the way up, and it's always been an investigation.
Yeah, and
What
I
do you-
did investigation and management, and the difference is the management cases are the cases that go to court. Same thing, I never looked to move out of child protective work.
I think most people have a pretty negative, I mean, as you know, we did some focus groups to talk to young people who are probably the most likely people to take the exam, and they all had this very negative outlook on the position, mostly because they believe falsely that every case ends up with a child being removed.
No.
It's a very small percent. It's actually under 3%.
We say we get almost 10,000 reports a year.
Right.
Of those, almost 3% of them go to court, so a very tiny percent go to court. And then of those, a small percentage
Right.
have removals.
So 3% of our 10,000 actually has a court petition filed. So we have it's about 70 plus percentage that our cases are unfounded, which
Right.
means there's no evidence to support, or not enough evidence to support the allegations.
But I'm right, aren't I, that even in those cases, you're sometimes able to help that family.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
And we return a lot of kids back home too. It's not unusual that families are struggling for whatever reason, whether it's mental illness or substance use or domestic violence. And with the right supports and resources, they are able to really make great strides. And our goal is always for kids to go home.
And when we're looking to remove a child, we first have to show that we've offered any services that that family needs and that we're looking for family supports to keep children out of foster care. We don't just remove and place a child directly in foster care. We're explaining to the family why we need to make an alternate plan and first asking them to make another plan for their child to stay with family, friends, whoever it may be that we can approve to say that is another safe place. Foster care is the last resort for us.
And has that changed since you guys have been caseworkers? Has it gotten more difficult to remove a child, or would you say it's about the same over the years?
You know, I don't know if I could say one way or the other. I think the pendulums tend to swing a little bit based on what's in the media. I think in Monroe County, certainly there's been challenges over the years. I think the grounds for a removal have not changed.
Correct.
A child has to be at imminent risk of immediate harm in order to remove them from their home, and you have to be able to sustain that in court. I think the public's perception is probably different than that. And I think, you know, even when we reference the perception people have of the job and that we remove kids all of the time, there are other people who would say we never remove kids, and we should.
We get both ends. You should remove more children or you're not, or you've removed too many. And it probably depends what's in the media at that point,
Right.
which way we're going. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
You've had some controversy over the last few years about not removing children. I think one of the things that gets lost in that discussion is the whole idea caseworkers don't have a crystal ball, right? I mean, they're making judgment calls all the time about what's the best thing to do. How do you talk about that a little bit? Because that must be hard.
I think it's a challenge. I think we're always trained whenever possible, children belong at home. And so you're constantly trying to balance what is imminent risk versus what is tolerable risk. It's traumatic to remove a child from their home. And so ideally, you really want to support a family with services first. And we don't have a crystal ball.
And sometimes we don't have all the information that neighbors, family, or other people have that they think we do. We don't have all that. And how did you not do that? Well, we don't have that information. So I think that's very upsetting for people when we haven't done something, but they don't realize we can't tell them what we do or do not have. But a lot of times we never had any of that information that was then brought forward later
Right.
on.
Our decisions are based on the information that we have
Yeah.
in the moment.
Right. So, given what we've talked about, that, you know, can be a difficult job, can be stressful, et cetera. What kinds of things do you do to support your caseworkers and to keep them from kind of burning out too soon?
I think mostly it's through peer and supervisory support. I think when you're having a really bad day, having a team around you is really what gets you through it. I think it's interesting. I always felt when I was a caseworker or as a supervisor on a team that our best days were sometimes our hardest days because that's when everyone really rallied together.
And I do believe what Amy just said is true. If you have a great supervisor, senior, and a supportive group of caseworkers around you, it makes this job much easier and much more tolerable. Like when we would do removals, I still talk to my first supervisor to this day. She will always be my mentor. She made it known that even though you had your caseload, that team, that was everybody's caseload. So if you had to do a removal or make a safety plan, you weren't out there doing it by yourself. A coworker was with you, the supervisor was finding whatever resources were needed, or if we were checking out someone, they were checking into our computer systems. It was a team effort. And I think the worst day, sometimes you came home the most fulfilled because you saw just how everyone came together in order to make sure that child or children were safe and that you got your job done and got it done safely.
Right.
It's pretty common now for, in many different kinds of work environments for people to work in teams. It wasn't that way when I was, starting in my career. I think you guys were way ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, I don't think you could do this work without a team.
No.
I think there's so many pieces that go into each of the cases, and especially on the days when you do have a removal, there's so many steps that have to be taken. You have to have a team around you.
You could never do it by yourself.
Right.
You would never be able to, right?
So talk for a minute about how COVID has impacted your operations. And I mean, I know it's substantial, obviously, and it has been for everybody. But talk about specifically about child protective services, foster and adoptive services. I mean, how has that changed over the last almost 2 years?
So when COVID first began back in March 2020.
2020, yeah.
I don't think any of us knew what would happen. It was, you sent your staff home, they were coming in maybe one day a week. How are we going to make sure families were seen, as well as not expose our caseworkers to anybody with COVID? So we had to put a lot of things out there very quickly, like questions you need to ask, PPE, all of that. And then for child protective investigation, the schools closed down, and very quickly our reports slowed down. Which positive is, you got to really catch up. You got to get your notes up to date. You did your collaterals. You closed a lot of cases. We saw caseloads go down tremendously. But on the opposite end, you were worried because a lot of the kids in our community had no oversight. They were in their houses all day. They weren't seeing their families out, their extended families. They weren't going to therapists, doctors. Everything was shut down. So we were very worried about what could be happening behind closed doors that there'd be no oversight for. So,
And simultaneously, when the number of reports coming in dropped, the courts had also stopped functioning. And so on the CPS management foster care side, there was no change in caseloads because we couldn't close anything. We couldn't facilitate adoptions. We couldn't facilitate returns home sometimes in the beginning. Having said that, we also learned we can work remotely. A caseworker's job is very rarely actually in an office, with the exception of the paperwork that we have to do. And paperwork is a huge piece of what we do, but you can do that anywhere. You can do that at your dining room table, you can do it in an office, you can do it sitting at Starbucks. So I think what we learned is a caseworker can really work from any place. And a lot of our staff were a lot more productive because there were fewer distractions for them. And then for those who, had younger kids at home or had other distractions at home, they realized working in the office was better for them. I think the loss of school and the loss of the connectivity for some of our kids has led to much more significant behavior, particularly with our teen population. We're finding that we're really struggling with kids and their behavior, and then simultaneously identifying relatives or foster homes that can handle that more challenging behavior.
And as COVID went on for CPSI, we saw numbers start to slowly grow to now they're at pre-COVID levels, if not higher. And staffing has been an issue. As we've seen, everybody has been losing staff through this. We have had the same. Monroe County has been excellent that they're continuing to hire as many as you can. It's just we saw a decline in the amount of people taking our test. And we've been giving them 4 times a year. So we always have new additional people on the list, but not to where we had it before. From what I understand, that's most of the civil service tests are saying that it's not just a caseworker test. So,
And in speaking with other agencies in Monroe County, they're seeing the same thing. We've lost, through COVID, the employment pool. And that's raised new challenges around maintaining caseloads. I think Kathy and I are doing what we can to jump in and do some direct work to support teams. And we always say we'll figure it out. We always do.
And our staff has been excellent. They've been resilient, and they're keeping it moving with a lot of obstacles within our community and staffing. But they're doing it, and they're doing a great job.
And they're doing it while they're dealing with the impact of COVID at home as well.
Many of them have young children. I mean, we just saw that the city school district closed down again for 5 days. That makes, if your school district closes down and your children can't be left home alone, it puts the staff has to figure that out. What am I going to do? I have to go to work, but my child is now home. So they've had a lot of things to deal with on top of the job, and going into the community during COVID and knocking on people's doors that you don't know what if they have it, so they've been very resilient in dealing with it, which has been great.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're going to continue to deal with it for a little while at least.
At least.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no way around that, right?
No.
Doesn't seem to be anyway. So, going back to recruitment again for a minute, what kind of person makes a good caseworker?
Someone with a lot of energy, who's highly organized,
I was
good
just gonna
time
say, like,
management skills.
they're able to adapt quickly. If you can only live by your schedule, if you have a schedule that says you have this at 9, 11, and 2, that's
Not gonna work.
that could all change in the first 5 minutes that you're at work. Because if you're handed a case that you might have 5 kids on, and you have to go to 5 different schools, and it might have a lot of history, so you're dealing with something that's going to require time, you have to cancel those other appointments, and you have to be able to be flexible. That organization and flexibility probably are my 2 biggest things in order to be a caseworker, that I'd say, because you don't ever know what your day is going to look like. And some days when you think it's going to be crazy, it's the quietest day in the world, and you get a lot done. And other days when you don't have much on your calendar, you're like, oh, I'm going to get so much done, something just thrown at you. So it's just being able to adapt.
And you have to be comfortable in the gray. There aren't clear lines in most cases that tells you a child is safe or unsafe. So many of our cases are very gray. Child maltreatment covers a vast array of challenges within a family. Unless you're dealing with outright child abuse, where you might have broken bones or burns or more serious child abuse. A lot of our work is very gray, and it's around engaging families and engaging children and figuring out what is the next best step.
You could have 2 cases that look exactly like, because they might come in with the same allegation, but they're very, very different. And when you get to the underlying conditions of what's going on with that family, that's kind of directing where the case is going. But you can't just look at them at face value and say, oh, this is what I'm going to do, because it really depends on the needs of the family and what's going on there.
Yeah, and I think you have to have a sense of humor. You've got to have a thick skin and a sense of humor.
Definitely.
What haven't I talked about?
We want everyone to take the civil service test.
It is a great place to work. I mean, there are really, really hard days, but I've never had a day that I came home feeling utterly defeated or anything like that. I love the people we work with. I love our team. I always say they're the hardest working people I know. I don't think sometimes the community completely gives credit for that, and they should, because they are incredibly hardworking individuals, every layer,
Absolutely. And again, my frustrations have never been about the work that we do. It's generally about things like we don't have enough people taking the civil service test right now. How are we going to cover everything? But it's never about not liking the work